And hello, I'm Mike Bird, joined with my good and fellow Australian now, Dr. Stephen Carlson, who is a senior research fellow, if that's your correct title, Stephen, at the
Yes.
Australian Catholic Unit, senior research fellow. I've known Stephen for a long time. I think even back in the day when he was a patents lawyer, if I remember correctly, who kind of dabbled a little bit in biblical studies, and his dabbling kind of went further and further. I think you're well known, Stephen, for your fantastic little book, Debunking the Secret Gospel of Mark. And I can say that because I'm nowhere near certain scholarly groups where that would be considered blasphemy. You also wrote your PhD thesis on the text of Galatians, which you did at Duke University. In the last few years, however, you've been at the Australian Catholic University in Melbourne, working on a number of things, several articles and essays here and there, but particularly working on a book about Papias of Hierapolis. Now, you've contributed two things. You contributed a chapter on Papias to the Cambridge Companion to the Apostolic Fathers, which, by the way, I think is probably one of the best essays in the book. But also recently, just now out, this one, Papias of Hierapolis, the exposition of the Dominical Oracles, which is a brand new collection and translation of the Papian corpus, which is quite an achievement. It's quite an achievement. For those who don't know, you normally, if you want to read some Papias, who Stephen will explain in a minute, you normally go to one of these, a copy of the Church Fathers from someone like Michael Holmes, or maybe you've seen J.B. Lightfoot or Bart Ehrman or Rick Brannon or something like that. But everything you know about Papias now has to change because Stephen has just changed it. Now, if you know nothing about Papias, that's probably an advantage because you don't have to kind of wipe the motherboard. But Stephen is going to tell us a lot more things about Papias. Stephen, can you first of all tell us who Papias is?
Right. Papias is a church leader in a town in modern day Turkey by the name of Hierapolis, and that is where Philip the Evangelist settled with his prophesying daughters. And we think that Papias probably wrote his books in the early second century, maybe 110, that kind of time frame. So he's really close to the first few generations of Christianity, and he claims to have spoken with two disciples of the Lord. That would be a elder named John and another by the name of Ristion, whom we don't know anything more about. But he's a Christian writer living very close to the age of the apostles.
Okay, so he's a key link between the apostolic age and the sub-apostolic age, and certainly leading to people like, say, Polycarp and Irenaeus. I know Irenaeus is always flapping his gums or his quill about, how he knew Papias, also how he knew Polycarp. That's right, isn't it? He knew Polycarp.
Yes.
That's right, yeah. So, but he's kind of a crucial link between the apostles and the next generation of church leaders, all the way through to the apologists. And a lot of people quote Papias in church history. And from your book, I could figure out there was a kind of like a recycling of the same things about the authorship of Matthew and Mark, that type of thing. So that those quotes kind of get recycled, but we don't actually have a copy of his works. His main book is known for, the five volumes, the Oracles of the Lord. We don't have that.
Right.
So let me rephrase that. Up until you came on the scene, what did we know about about Papias and his work and his writings? What was the general consensus fairly recently?
So basically, Papias wrote 5 books of exposition of the Dominical Oracles, and there's a lot of controversy or dispute over what the Dominical Oracles are. but it's clear that in his interpretation of them, he quotes a lot of Jesus traditions, which includes some pretty fantastic stuff. For example, he tells us that in heaven, there's going to be so much wine that every grapevine will give 10,000 shoots, and every shoot 10,000 branches, and every branch 10,000 clusters, and every cluster 10,000 grapes. And when you press it, it gives you like jugs and jugs of wine. And similarly with wheat stock, and so there'll be abundance of wine and wheat in heaven, and things will be so productive that even the animals, which will still be around, they'll all go vegan, and so and so the lions and tigers and bears or whatever will just eat grain like everybody else, and so those are basically fulfillments of various Old Testament prophecies, of which Papias says will happen in Jesus's kingdom.
Okay, so
And
blessings of agricultural fecundity, that sort of thing. Okay.
right, and but in his prologue, which really interested the church historian Eusebius, he talks about his various sources for finding these oracles and these traditions about Jesus, and he discusses the writing of the Gospel of Mark, and he discusses what Matthew did, and these furnish the earliest extant discussion about how these Gospels came to be. And so it's been of immense interest, starting from Eusebius in the early 4th century, like 325-ish, to the present, for anybody who wants to know about how the Gospel of Mark came to be, and so things like that. So it's been a fabulous interest there. Now, unfortunately, all 5 books of Papias were lost. People just stopped copying that, and I think it's because they got uncomfortable with this really materialistic view of heaven that'll like satisfy every appetite you have, and so which goes by certain names as millennialism, because it's supposed to happen in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Sometimes it's called chiliasm for the Greek word for 1,000. So as a result, his views kind of went out of favor, and people just stopped copying his work. And so all we have left are quotations by people who are interested in some of the things he had to say. So we have from Irenaeus, we have the story of the grapevine that I told you. From Eusebius, who gives us like 2/3 of the fragments or quotations, we get a big chunk from his preface about how he cares about oral tradition and hearing it from the right Christian leaders. We get a big little section about how the Gospel of Mark came to be. We have a tiny thing about Matthew. We have a few stories of miracle stories in the post-Easter church. So we have a raising of the dead, and we have Justus Barsabbas drank some poison, and he was kept unharmed because of his faith. And there's also a story about a woman accused of many sins before the Lord, which we think might be related to the famous adulteress in John chapter 8. And that's what Eusebius tells us. And after that, we get a tiny little thing about the death of Judas, how he kind of bloated up after his betrayal. And we get a few more things, like Papias talked about the administration of angels and that kind of stuff. And that's basically it. And people have been collecting these quotations and references to Papias without a lot of discrimination. So my book here gives you both more and less of Papias than we ever knew. So I find every single quotation or mention of Papias I could find till the age of printing, and there's like 98 separate mentions of them. And it goes all the way up to the 15th century where a monk listed the people who wrote about the 6 days of creation, and Papias is in that list. And but I also take a look at him and say some of these things that people were relying on aren't actually Papias. They're like somebody else, like Paphos or a different Papias. And so I go through that and I kind of filter out a lot of the stuff that doesn't really belong to Papias. So I think there's 16 fragments that are Papias, the one that we're talking about, not some other Papias, and 98 mentions of Papias throughout the ancient and medieval church. So you could see both for yourself. So if you want the minimal Papias, like you've got that. If you want the maximal one, I got that too. And then I have a whole list of other places where people may have used Papias, but they didn't do it by name, and so I list those separately, and then things like that. And I have a big section of stuff that isn't Papias at all in a list of spurious things, so people should not be tempted to cite those again.
Okay, so that's good. Well, I mean, that's a good, like, I think Holmes has got like, what, 12 fragments of Papias.
Like 26.
Oh, is it 26? He's got 26. Yeah. So you've actually gone through and you've been more discriminating, like, okay, this definitely comes from Papias. And then stuff that's kind of a reference or an allusion to him as a kind of separate well, actually, when people are talking about him, and then a third category of probable allusions, and then this fourth category of spurious. So we've got fragments, testimonies, allusions, and then the spurious categories.
Yeah, basically. And I break the allusions down into those which cite somebody else for new content. Like a predecessor of ours said, could be Papias. I don't know, but I'm putting it in there so you could judge. And then the other ones that just overlap Papias. So almost like a whole lot of stuff on the origin of the Gospel of Mark. It's
which kind of gets recycled over church history, often without saying where they got it from, but because of the wording, it kind of sounds like what Eusebius first attributed to Papias. So stuff like that.
Yes, okay. Exactly.
Okay, that's very helpful. Now, you've also got this both in the you give a translation in English, but you also include the original text, which includes obviously a lot of Greek, a bit of Latin, but every now and again, I think some Syriac, and even the odd bit of Armenian. So I did not know that Jacob Arminius invented his own language. I mean, this is it some sort of heavenly language for people who believe in free will and universal atonement?
No, it's the Armenian language from the Kingdom of Armenia, which was the first country to go Christian even before the Roman Empire.
Yep, in the 280s, if I remember correctly, in the 280s.
Something like that. But the earliest works in Armenian is 403 when they translated the Bible. And so and so I had to learn some Armenian. That was kind of fun. It's basically like Greek with a lot of Persian words. So
okay. So are you planning a trip to Armenia anytime soon?
No.
Okay. Well, I think I know the capital of Georgia is, like, was it Tbilisi or something? It's
Tbilisi, yeah.
Tbilisi. I can't remember what the capital of Armenia is.
I think it's Yerevan, which houses all these huge. It's got like thousands and thousands of Armenian manuscripts.
Okay. Well, I'll take your word for that one. If there is someone interested in early Christianity, in particular things like the Apostolic Fathers, what do they get out of your book that say they won't get out of a more accessible translation like Michael Holmes or Rick Brannon?
What they'll get out of my book is basically everything that can be known about Papias in the ancient world. It's really a reference work. It's not so much of an introduction to Papias. I wrote that for the Cambridge Companion, which gives a nice overview of everything that's probably known about Papias. distilled down to the good stuff, not like this analysis of why this thing that everybody cites isn't really Papias, and so things like that.
Okay. Okay, good. So this is what will probably prove to be a very important reference work for the study of early Christianity, particularly the transition from the apostolic to the post-apostolic period. And I think what you've done, Steve, is very important, breaking down the difference between this is what he definitely said. This is it's like what people said to him. These are the latter allusions. I think that category is going to prove very helpful, rather than the sort of wild and sometimes just, I don't say careless, but maybe less discerning attribution of a lot of stuff to Papias. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's something people do cite, particularly about the Gospels, like, Mark was Peter's interpreter. Matthew wrote a Hebrew. Actually, that might be a good thing to quiz you on what you've got here. What does it mean that Mark was Peter's interpreter? Does it mean he was literally talking Greek on behalf of the Aramaic speaking Peter? Was he more like a scribe or a secretary? Any thoughts on Mark's role there?
Yeah, well, you have a number of different proposals out there. I think it's basically whenever Peter left Palestine and needed to speak Greek, even though he could speak some Greek, it's just a lot easier to do it with an interpreter who knows that. And I think Mark happened to be the interpreter that he used on some occasions. And after Peter was gone, basically they went to Mark and said, "Hey, can you write this stuff down?" And so that's what Mark did.
Okay, so yep. And what about Matthew as the more Hebrew gospel?
Yeah, I personally take a slightly different line on that. I think what Papias says Matthew wrote is a testimony book of Old Testament quotations, which ends up in our Gospel of Matthew as those formula quotations, where basically he said, and this is what Jesus did to fulfill that. And so because we know that our Matthew wasn't written in Hebrew.
It's a great composition.
Yeah, it's a great composition. It depends on Mark. And so I think Papias is talking about an important source for Matthew. It's not that Q source of sayings that Jesus did, like so many scholars think, but it's actually a source book of Old Testament prophecies that Jesus fulfilled.
Okay. And finally, Stephen, a lot of people make a big deal about Papias preferring oral tradition over written sources. Okay.
Yeah.
Is Papias the kind of guy who says books bad, oral tradition good, or is it a little bit more complex than that?
Well, it's a little more complex than that. For one, everybody in antiquity would say, books are bad. You got to learn it from me. Pay me the money, and I'll teach you personally. And so, if you could get it out of a book, you're not going to learn it as well as if you had my oral instruction. And so I think Papias is doing that. The other thing is that the books, like the Gospel of Mark, aren't quite doing what he's interested in. He's really interested in just laying out all of the Old Testament passages that Jesus fulfilled and will fulfill in his return. And so Mark only has some of that, and so you could get some of it out of there, but it's just not complete enough for his interest.
Excellent. Which part of Q do you think Papias knew? Because I know you have some very strong feelings about Q. Q is a hypothetical source known to Luke and Matthew, which contains many oracles of the Lord. So, I mean, it would be fair to say Papias was writing a commentary on Q. I mean, that's a fairly well-known scholarly view, or some variation thereof. What's your feelings on Papias and Q, Stephen?
I think it's a misreading of Papias. It was inspired for its time in the 1830s, and kind of took on legs after that, but I don't think there's any real basis to it.
Okay, so Papias was not someone who was one of the last people to handle the Q document before it went missing, or ended up in, I think, in a church in Scotland, if I remember correctly, according to Dan Brown. Yeah, I've been around a few. I've been around a few churches in Scotland. I did not see Q while I was there.
Yeah.
But that's just me. That's just me. Okay. Do you have any future for Papias studies there, Stephen?
Well, this book here tells you what I think he said. I'm working on my next project is to tell you what I think he meant.
So there'll be a commentary on the sayings.
Yes, yes. And so I'm kind of working on that, and that'll give you in painstaking detail or not what I think he's actually up to in these things, and kind of bring in how that generation of tradition kind of worked in his time.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll definitely look for that one. I'll give you something to do during your COVID lockdown period. I mean, Steve and I are both in Melbourne under somewhat reduced freedom of movement conditions, as is necessary to bring this thing under control. But that's okay. Well, Stephen, always a pleasure to work with you and the good people at the Center for, what's it called? The Center for
IRCI.
Critical Inquiry.
Yeah, Critical Inquiry is in there. The Institute for Religion and Critical Inquiry.
Yes, that place. So
I'll just make my boss very sad for blanking on the name.
It's late. It's late in the afternoon. It's nearly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Stephen. So it's okay to be a little bit tired this time of the day. Okay. Well, Steve, it's been great talking to you about Papias of Hierapolis. Again, that's the book about the Expositions of Dominical Oracles. This is going to be the resource in the future for anyone who's citing Papias, particularly in scholarly research or in academic papers. Might be a little bit on the Exy side to purchase, but you can definitely get it through your library, or maybe is it cheaper on Kindle, Stephen, or is it on Kindle yet?
I don't know, but Kindle hasn't been cheaper.
Oh, hasn't it?
No.
Okay, well, do some really, really good favors for Oxford University, and maybe you can get a copy of that. But that'll be necessary reading for anyone interested in early Christianity. A pleasure to talk to you, Stephen. All the best for a pleasant evening, and I'll catch you some other time.